If there's one thing I loved the most about How I Met Your Mother was the fact that it always respected the different perspective of its characters. In so many ways, the show emphasized on the fact that people could perceive different events from completely different lenses and have different takes on them. But How I Met Your Mother's structure of these events is ultimately inspired by a movie made in 1950 called Rashomon. Rashomon was a movie directed by the iconic Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, and is telling the same story over and over again through different lenses. The story starts with three people during a rainstorm who are telling the story of a murder, the murder of a samurai and the alleged assault of his wife. The story is told by four different people, with each telling something entirely different from the others while having some similarities to one another. The first person is the bandit himself. The bandit, Tajimura, claims he came across the couple in the forest and he was instantly taken by the wife's beauty. He tricks the samurai by luring him away and tying him up. He then rapes the wife, though the word is never directly used in the film, while the husband is forced to watch. Afterwards, the wife supposedly begs Tajimura to fight her husband to death to preserve her honor. Tajimura claims he releases the samurai and they engage in a noble, skillful sword duel, and he wins and kills the samurai. He says he was so impressed by the wife that he wanted to marry her, but she fled. Tajimura portrays himself as both a passionate lover and a heroic fighter, and he romanticizes his crime to protect his ego. The second person is the wife. According to the wife, after the bandit rapes her, Tajimura leaves. She unties her husband, but is overwhelmed with shame. The samurai looks at her with disgust and contempt, refusing to speak. His cold gaze devastates her. In despair, she begs him to kill her, or for her to kill him, because she cannot bear the shame. She claims she fainted with a dagger in her hand, and when she awoke, her husband was dead, but she doesn't know how it happened. Her story is full of guilt and emotional breakdown. She presents herself as both a victim and someone emotionally shattered by judgment and societal expectations. The third person is the husband. Although dead, speaking from beyond the grave via spirit medium, the samurai offers yet another version. He says Tajimura tried to convince his wife to run away with him. To the samurai's shock, she agreed. However, after going with Tajimura for a while, she turns on him and insists that he should kill her husband to avoid the shame of being with two men. Tajimura is disgusted and flees. The wife then runs away. Alone and humiliated, the samurai claims he killed himself with her dagger out of despair. The samurai paints himself as a tragic figure, a man betrayed by his wife who chooses to die with honor. With these three perspectives, it's almost unclear who's telling the truth. But as I said in the beginning, there are people stuck in a rainstorm who are telling this story. And there's a fourth point of view. Someone who was hiding and witnessed the events from a distance. One of the three people in the rainstorm. The woodcutter. The woodcutter initially says he only found the body, but later he admits to witnessing the entire event, raising questions about why he lied. Was it because he wanted to avoid or conceal that he took the dagger? In his version, Tajimura begs the wife to marry him after the assault. She mocks both men, calling them cowards, and demands they fight for her. Reluctantly, the two men engage in a clumsy, desperate duel, not at all the honorable battle Tajimura claimed. The samurai is eventually killed, but the wife runs away. This account shows all three characters, bandit, wife, and samurai, as flawed, frightened, and human. No one is heroic. It's messy and possibly closest to the truth, but even the woodcutter's motives are suspicious. If you watched How I Met Your Mother, then you already know how similar this is to that story. In Rashomon, the key isn't only that people lie about some events or how they see them, but ultimately why this difference exists. For the bandit, it's the messiness of his actions that matter. That's how he sees life, always fighting and although not heroic, always the winner. The samurai, on the other hand, has a perspective of nobility. He sees himself as a noble man and at the end, the victim. The wife has a feminine side of the story. Through her lens, it's almost not important how the two men fought or who overcame who, but who wanted her and got or couldn't get her. Funny thing is, if we take the woodcutter's story as the truth, then there's the matter of how a person sees themselves versus who they actually are. The wife's story makes her desperate, while in reality, she was the one with power. By now, I think you know how similar this is to the style How I Met Your Mother adapts for many of its episodes. This is at its core what How I Met Your Mother does. It shows what's most important to a character when they're telling a story versus who they actually are. How I Met Your Mother's style always had an emphasis on perspective. For example, the entire Doppler and Dahmer story could be said through this. As Lily and Marshall put it, timing is important in a relationship. For example, Marshall made a romantic gesture at the right moment that made Lily fall for him. But Ted believes that it's all about perspective. Whereas if Lily didn't like Marshall already, she would have found this gesture creepy. For Lily, it is the romantic aspect of the story that matters, and that's how she sees it, while others don't see it that way. Another example comes in the story of Honey, Zoe's cousin. The story is told through the eyes of Ted and Barney. Barney's version says that Honey flirted with him in a dirty way all night, while Ted remembers it as Honey having an interest in him. The interesting aspect of their stories is the fact that while in both stories, Honey flirts with the POV character, in Barney's version, she's much closer to what Barney sees or would like to see in a woman. This sort of narrative style, which is famously called Rashomon style, makes a question about reality. Because of the different perspectives, every character has their own subjective reality. But aside from finding the truth, does this have any other importance? And I have to say yes. It reveals theme like no other stories. Conflict is the base of storytelling, but when the conflict isn't in the narrative, but in fact the ways the characters perceive it, themes start to show themselves. More importantly, these kind of stories raise one question. Are any of these realities actually true? In both Rashomon and How I Met Your Mother episodes, there are stories told from different perspectives, but as people tend to see certain things because of who they are, what if they don't see other things, or more importantly, they deny what they've seen due to various factors? There's an episode in How I Met Your Mother where Ted meets an awful ex named Karen. Everybody hates Karen and thinks she's insufferable and pretentious. But what Ted sees is different because of his sense of nostalgia. He denies the fact that Karen was an awful person. There's also the Ashtray episode in which 3 completely different versions of one story is told. First by Ted, who thinks the captain was threatening him all night. Then Robin corrects him by saying that Captain was flirting with her all night and Ted was drunk and making a fool of himself. Then the story shifts a third time, this time by Lily, to reveal that Robin was drunk too and the captain was neither flirting with her or threatening Ted, but he was simply making conversation with them and ended up insulting Lily's taste in art and calling her just a school teacher. But I have to say, there are more similarities between the movie and the show than one might think. The 3 main players in How I Met Your Mother, Ted, Robin, and Barney, map neatly into the archetypes in Rashomon. Ted, much like the samurai, views himself as noble and romantic. He's convinced his story is destined to be a grand, tragic love saga, even when it unravels in messy human ways. Barney is our bandit, who casts every misstep as a feat of daring, every awkward encounter as proof of his irresistible charm, bending facts to suit his ego. And Robin occupies the space of the wife. Her perspective is often sidelined, filtered through Ted's idealism or Barney's self-importance, yet it carries its own emotional weight. Her doubts, her independence, her frustration with being misunderstood. In both stories, these subjective truths reveal more about who these characters want to be than about what really happened. This leads the Rashomon structure into another beautiful conclusion, because in these types of stories, everything is told from an unreliable perspective. When we get to the end, we're not sure if that works or that's how it happened or not. You could argue that How I Met Your Mother saving the truth about the mother until the very end mirrors the Rashomon effect, withholding the truth until the final account, if such a truth exists at all. Maybe Ted saw Tracy as his soulmate and chose her as the mother of his children because he had given up on life or on Robin. In the end, it is Ted who is telling this story. If you enjoy videos like this, then I suggest you give this video about Honora and Dan Harmon's Story Circle a watch, and I'll see you next time.